Well, good morning, everyone, and greetings from California, and welcome to the HSI webinar on repertorization. And I hope everyone's doing well this morning. So we're off on an adventure to talk about repertorization charts. And I'm calling this webinar, The Case of the Prince, the Glass Slipper, and the Repertorization Chart. And as we go through, you'll see why I'm using that analogy. Oh, Bill, okay, I'll do it this way then. I thought my down arrow would work, but oh, I guess I have to get it down there. All right, we'll get this figured out. Okay, so the question for you is, how was the quest to find Cinderella similar to the quest to find the Samilima? So that's what we're going to explore today. Or another way of looking at it is, how can a repertorization chart help you find the perfect fit? Because that's what you're looking for, is the perfect fit between the case and the remedy. And the repertorization chart can help, or it can not help. Okay, so let's just look at what a repertorization chart looks like. Now, some of you have been doing repertorizations by hand, and they do exactly the same thing. So there's nothing that we're going to talk about today that you can't do with a repertorization chart that you've done by hand. There's absolutely nothing. The only thing a software program does is it does the math for you, and you can move things around, but the outcomes are exactly the same. So this is what a repertorization chart looks like from Radar Opus. So I'm going to show you a little later some that have been done on Mac Repertory. They do exactly the same thing, they're just organized a little bit differently. And there are all kinds of repertorization charts out there. There's some free software programs that you can, if you do a search on the web, you can find some of those. So the things that we're going to talk about apply to all of them, regardless. So what does a repertorization chart do? It's nothing fancy. What it does is it counts or totals the number of rubrics in which a particular remedy appears. So it counts for you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, counts. And then it places the results in descending order. So usually the highest, the one that's in the most rubrics will show up first. And you can organize charts in different ways, but generally speaking, they go in descending order. And then it adds the weights, so the grades. So if something is a grade of 4, then it adds in a 4. If it's a grade of 2, it adds in a 2. That's all it does. It's straight addition. There's no algorithms, there's no fancy statistics, it's straight addition. So there's nothing magical about a repertorization chart. It's, in the long run, in the most basic thing, it is totally dependent on what you put into it. So the rubrics that you put in are going to give you good results or not very good results. And we're going to talk more about that as we go along. Okay, so let's look at a repertorization chart. And I'll go over it so that you know what the different pieces are. So across the top, across here, we have the remedies. So they give you the name of all the remedies. And then this is the order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, goes all the way. Then here, the next line is the number of rubrics that remedy appeared in. So now we have 13 rubrics here, and we have the number 14 up there, which is a bit of a mystery, and we're gonna talk about that in a minute. And then we have 1 rubric that sulfur doesn't appear in. So actually that number, if we were just straight counting, should be 12. So why is it 14? So then the number at the bottom is 22, and that is the adding up of all of these weights, this column of weights. Those are the grades of the remedy in that rubric. And that, if you add those numbers up, is 20. So why is the number 22 here? Okay, so let's go over here. So obviously this is your list of rubrics. This tells you the number of remedies that are in that rubric. And that's an important thing to pay attention to, and we'll talk about that later. Then over here is a column that is called intensity. And you can change the intensity of a rubric when you put it in a software program. And you can do it when you do it by hand too. So if you notice here, we've got rubric number 1, mind, fear, poverty of, has a 2 by it. And the third one has a 2 by it. And that has affected these numbers. So the 2 has doubled the appearance of that remedy in that rubric. So that's why we get 14 up here, because we've got a 2 here and we doubled the 1, and a 2 here and we've doubled the 1, and then we also double the weights. Now Vitulkas talks about intensity, and some people do repertorizations and never look at intensity. Everything is an intensity of 1, but this is an option that you have. And the repertorization charts that we're going to look at, I've used an intensity of 1 in all of them, just so that it doesn't get confused. But I just want you to know that that's available to you, and you can do it yourself. If you want to increase the intensity on a hand scored rubric chart, you just double whatever it is. So if it's a 3, an intensity of 3, I think 4 is the highest intensity, then that number, if mind, fear of poverty was a 3, then it would be 3. You would add in 3 to your total number of rubrics. Okay, so that's all it is. That's all there is to the chart. And then inside here, these are the grades for each one of the remedies. So over here we have a 4, which is the highest grade, and that indicates that there has been a cure related to that, besides having a very strong proving record. Okay, so let's look at some of the variables that affect the repertorization, and there are many of them. Okay, so one variable that will affect a repertorization is the rubrics per remedy. So when you go to the repertory and you look up some remedy or some rubric, chances are sulfur will be in many of those rubrics, because we have 17,634 rubrics for sulfur. So sulfur is very well represented in the repertory. Phosphorus is almost 15,000, calc is 13,000, arsenicum is almost 13,000. So you can see that there are some remedies that are very well represented, and there are some that don't have very many rubrics associated with them at all. So what does that mean in terms of a repertorization? Well, chances are that if you put in 5 rubrics into a repertorization, sulfur probably has a much greater chance of popping up than arundo. So another thing that you want to think about is that typically the no-sods are underrepresented in the repertory. So if you're looking for a no-sod, you want to be aware that, you know, we don't have 17,000 rubrics for a no-sod. So the chances of them showing up unless you have a very specific repertorization, are less than the chances of sulfur showing up. And probably from your own experience, you've conducted a number of repertorizations where sulfur tops out. So based on this information, the chances are that sulfur is going to be high in the repertorization versus something like syphilinum. So the larger the remedy, the more likely it's going to score high in the repertorization. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at the results of your repertorization. Okay, another variable when you're doing a repertorization is the more rubrics listed, the more likely the highest rated remedies will be polycrests. So based on the chart that we just looked at, where sulfur has almost 17,000 rubrics, if we put a whole list of rubrics in our repertorization, the chances are that sulfur is going to come near the top of the list because we have many more options for sulfur to show up. So if you look at this repertorization, we have a lot of polycrests at the top of this list. We've got sulfur, sepia, pulsatilla, calcarea, phosphorus, natrium, lachesis. Those are all big polycrests. So one of the things that you want to think about is how many rubrics you're putting into your repertorization. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, so here's an example of fewer rubrics and very specific rubrics being put into a repertorization. So this first one has 5, and only 3 of them have actually shown up in the rubrics, but stramonium, which is not a large rubric, not a large remedy, is at the top. And then of course we do, as we go down, we've got some other polycrests. And at the bottom one here, phosphorus, there's 8 rubrics here. Phosphorus comes out at the top, so we might think, we'll have to look at that because phosphorus is well represented in the repertory. And so the next one is spongia, which is a much smaller rubric, a much smaller remedy. So it's something to think about when you're putting together a repertorization chart, and you definitely want to be careful about how many rubrics you put in your chart. And we kind of have a rule of thumb that the maximum is 10 rubrics per repertorization. Because if you get beyond that, then you're limiting some of the smaller rubrics, smaller remedies, because the chances are you're gonna hit on those rubrics in the big remedies. So you can always go back and look at other rubrics and other symptoms and say, does it match? Does it fit in this repertorization? Does it fit in this remedy? But it's safer to limit the number of rubrics you put in. Okay. Now there's another variable. Very large rubrics will do little to help you differentiate among remedies. Now I put together a repertorization here, and I used all big rubrics. They're way bigger than you should ever use. So we've got the smallest one I think in there is 228. So you can see that we've got these big rubrics, and there's nothing to help us differentiate. We've got 11 all the way across the top. We've got some difference in weight, but not that much. We go 30, 29, 28, 27. It's not huge. So you generally don't want to use large rubrics. You can use them afterwards to check and to confirm, if Is the person chilly? Because that's going to be a large rubric. And so you can confirm with those large rubrics, but they're not going to help you get to a remedy. So here I did the top repertorization just to show you how things can change. I have some smaller rubrics, and then I also have some large rubrics. And then at the bottom, I pulled out the large rubrics. So all we have are 4 of the smaller rubrics from this repertorization at the top. So let's look and see what happens. So lachesis, apis, and arsenicum, we still have lacus, apis, and arsenicum down here. They are in a different order. So the apis has changed place. Then the phosphorus is moved up, sulfur moved down, mercurius moved up, and opium is in the 7th spot. And if you look at this top chart, opium is way down here. We probably wouldn't even consider it because it's in 28th place. So this is just an example of how a repertorization can change when you don't use big rubrics. They just don't do you much good. Okay, so this is a repertorization from Mac Repertory. I just wanted to show it to you because it's a little bit different. It does the same thing. Things are in a little bit different order, but they still have this is the number of the number of remedies in each rubric, and they don't put the numbers in here, but they have the four grades in the same way that radar does. So it's just an example. And again, this is a repertorization with too many rubrics and too many large rubrics. And here's another one with too many rubrics and too many large rubrics, and we end up with polycrests. And you know, polycrests, they're fine, and they might be the answer to your case, but I'm just suggesting to you that if you put in big rubrics and you put in many rubrics, you are going to end up with polycrests. So Vitulka says, great thought should be applied to the choice of symptoms to be used in a repertorization. And this is the key to a good repertorization, is the choice of symptoms. Okay, so here's another variable that you want to think about when you're doing a repertorization, and it has to do with rubric choices. So sometimes we come across rubrics that we think are pretty neat rubric. Oh, this really fits. But they're small rubrics, and they're actually for a common symptom. So for instance, let's look at nose obstruction, has 334 remedies, and nose congestion has 2 remedies. Now, generally in modern times, we use the term congestion, that when somebody's nose is stopped up and they can't breathe. So you go and you say, oh yeah, I found congestion. That's the word that the client used. But you look at that and you say, 2 remedies. Does that make sense that there would only be 2 remedies that have to do with somebody's nose being congested? And the answer is no. And so the rubric, the appropriate rubric, is nose obstruction, which is 334 remedies, which is a very common symptom, which we would expect to have a large set of remedies for that rubric. So you have to be careful and think about, when you come across a small remedy, a small rubric, is this a common remedy, because it's a common symptom, because it's very important, and there are lots of those in the repertory. You'll come across them all the time. So another thing to think about is, have I limited my rubric too much? So sometimes the rubrics get very, very, very specific. And then you get down to 1 or 2 remedies. And that's not always the best. Well, generally, it's usually not the best rubric to pick, because you're eliminating a lot of other possibilities. So sometimes it's a good idea to backtrack a little bit and pick a rubric that's a little more comprehensive. So here, this stool scanty one I think is interesting, because stool small quantity has quite a few remedies, but stool scanty has 220, which obviously is a much bigger rubric. So something to keep in mind. And a lot of times when you do your repertorization exercises, I'll put you on a rubric that you've picked. I may put 1 remedy after it or 2 remedies after it. And that's so that you'll think about, whoa, is this the best rubric for this symptom? Or is there a bigger one? Is it really strange, rare, and peculiar? And if it's not really strange, rare, and peculiar, then you probably want to look for another rubric that might be more comprehensive. So another thing that happens that I notice, and this I see from doing the repertory exercises, is people get to a rubric and they say, oh, this is the one. It's the first thing that comes in alphabetical order. And if you go a little farther, there's something that's more comprehensive and bigger. So one example is this is stool thin green is 10 remedies. Stool watery green, if you go a little farther down the rubric, is 42 remedies. So, you know, just watch for that because it does pop up. And synthesis is wonderful because they have those cross references. There's the parentheses, and then there's that little arrow that points northeast. And then they'll list some other rubrics that are similar or that you might want to check out to see if they are more fitting to your symptom. So use those. It's a wonderful thing that synthesis has done, that it's got all those cross references. And so definitely I want you to think, is this a small rubric for a common symptom? And if it is, you need to look for a more comprehensive rubric. And decide if very small rubrics are overly specific, because they might be, and then that's going to limit the number of remedies that you might consider. Okay, so here's another variable that comes up in doing a repertorization, and that's that you find several rubrics that nicely explain your symptom that you want to include. And so you put all 3 of them in your repertorization. Well, what happens is, let's say it's NAT-MUIR, and you have 3, let's say you have 3 rubrics that have NAT-MUIR in them. Well, then the number of rubrics in which the remedy appears will be overly high. In other words, NAT-MUIR gets to vote 3 times. So if it's in 3 rubrics that you put in, it gets 3 votes, whereas if it were in 1 rubric, it would only get 1 vote. So you're kind of, you're skewing, or you're giving a greater weight to NAT-MUIR than maybe it actually should have in your repertorization. And that's because you're using a number of rubrics that express the same idea. So I've given you some examples here of things that of rubrics that you might use that really express the same idea. Head itching of scalp warm bed aggravates, there's 9 remedies. Head itching of scalp night, there's 16. Head hair falling spots in, head hair baldness patches. So those are two that you might say, oh yeah, you know, they really express the same idea. So what do you do when that happens? Well, moving along here. So what do you do when you've got several rubrics that express the same idea? Well, one strategy is that you find the most comprehensive rubric and use it. So find the biggest rubric that expresses what you want. And then you can cross-check, and you can, and if you have a smaller rubric, then you can say, well, is Nat Muir is in this smaller rubric, is it represented in the bigger rubric? So you can check, and that way you wouldn't miss something if there was something in the smaller rubric that you really want to look at. So then there's also a system where you can combine rubrics. And I'm going to show you here. So you would combine rubrics that you think are absolutely the same. So I'm going to show you here what happens in a repertorization when you combine rubrics and how it might change it. So in the first repertorization, we have 11 rubrics. They're just listed, and the order is lycopodium, conium, nux vomica, calcarea, calicarb, califos, silica. In the combined group, nux vomica moves to the top. We still have lycopodium. Nat Muir moves up quite a bit, as I recall. I can't remember what number it is up here. Yeah, it's 13 here. It moves to 3 here. Silica moves up a bit. Califos moves up. Calicarb up here, that is number 5, doesn't even show up on this chart at the bottom. So obviously calicarb was probably overrepresented, got to vote more than one time. So you can see that combining does change the outcome of the repertorization. So it's another thing to think about, and you want to be careful about listing several rubrics that really talk about the same symptom. So some words of caution about combining rubrics. They need to express the same symptom. You can't combine rubrics that are different symptoms. You can't do that. And you can combine rubrics across sections. I know that's sometimes a question for people. Do they all have to be in extremities, or do they all have to be in generals? No, they don't, but they have to express the same idea. So nose, hay fever, asthmatic, breathing with, and respiration, asthmatic, hay fever with, you know, I would argue those are pretty similar. And then this twilight one, generals, evening, twilight in the ag, generals, twilight in the ag, mind, twilight, ag, pretty much the same rubric. So those you would want to combine. So one thing, if you're a radar user, and this is true for Mac Repertory, but I don't know how, I'm not familiar with Mac Rep, so I don't really know how to combine rubrics there. But there are 2 functions in radar. One is a group function, and one is a combination. You want to use the group function, because going back to this repertorization here, this combined one, let me get back to the combined one. You see at the left here, it says AA, BB, CC, DD. Excuse me. Those tell you what rubrics have been combined, and that's very important, because if you use the combination and not the group, so you want to use the group function, if you use the combination, it combines the rubrics for you, but you don't have any record of what you combine. It just puts it all into one rubric and names it something. Probably the biggest rubric. So particularly if for Barbara, when you're doing cases, if you're going to combine rubrics, you definitely want to have a record of what you've combined, because it's very important for the supervisor to be able to look at your case and see what you've combined and whether it's been accurately combined. So if you are using radar, use the group function and not the combination function. That's just a little aside for the radar people. Okay, so here's a repertorization from Mac Repertory, and they have a kind of different system for combining. And if you look at this, the rubrics that are crossed out, those are actually rubrics that have been combined. So it's a little different display, a little different way of doing it. But in Mac Repertory, you obviously can also combine rubrics. I just wanted to show that to you. Okay, so one of the things that we have to think about, when we get this, is that the first three top scoring remedies are not always the best choices. And I see it over and over and over and over and over again, that people do their repertorization, they think they've put in the perfect things, and the top three, it's got to be one of these top three. And it's just not the case. Sometimes you have to look deep into a repertorization, because it's all going to depend on what you've put in here. This is just the results. This is just adding up of what you've put in here. So what you put in is critically important to what you're going to get out. So that's number one. The other thing is that when you look at a repertorization and you go, okay, here's one, phosphorus, arsenicum, and natmur. Those are the top three. Those are the only ones I'm going to look at. But if we look at the numbers in the chart, we've got a number of remedies here that scored a 5. So it seems logical that maybe we should look at all of those. And depending on how good our rubrics are over here, maybe we should also look at the 4s. Maybe. And we have, boy, in this one, we got a big row of 4s. And then if we look at the weights, we've got a 10, and then the second one is an 11, and a 10, and a 9. And then we go down here to our first 4, our first set of 4 rubrics, and we have another 10 in weight. So you need to look at these numbers in your repertorization, because they might give you some clues, particularly if you're off 1 or 2 over here. And, you know, you also want to look at these that have a 4, because if this is like a huge characteristic symptom for your case, you might want to give that remedy that has that 4 a careful look. It's not saying that, you know, that's where you need to go, but you need to look at it, check it in the materia medica, and see what it, you know, is there a match there? Does it make any sense? If it doesn't, great, forget it. But it might make some sense. Okay, so here's another one. We've got a 6. So if we just took the first 3, we've got a 6, a 5, and a 5. And then we've got a whole bunch of 5s. So there are a number of remedies that have shown up in 5 rubrics. And then, of course, we want to go back and look at those rubrics and say, well, which are the most characteristic? Does this one really, you know, dreams, I can't even say it, apocalyptic, apocalyptic, I don't know why I can't say that. Anyway, you know, we've got 3, is that an important rubric here? Well, I don't know. Depends on the case. And then we've got a 4 down here. So you have to think, you know, and here in number pulsatilla, we have a 10. And over here in Staphysagria, we have an 11. And of course, this 4 is going to affect that 11 and boot it up. So you want to look at these numbers in your chart, because you can't just say it's the first 3. And particularly if the first one is sulfur or phosphorus or something like that, because we know those are going to show up. So another thing that you might want to check out are Coonsley dots. So in your repertory, there are Coonsley dots, and they are by a remedy that is likely to be curative if the client exhibits that symptom. So that's an important thing to look at. Those are very helpful, those Coonsley dots. So you want to look at remedies that have the same total number of rubrics. Check them out. It may lead nowhere, but you may find a better match. Remedies with similar weights, even if it's deeper in the repertorization chart. Remedies with a grade of 4. Or they have a Coonsley dot. Remedies within a very characteristic rubric. So sometimes when you go back and look at your repertorization, you can say, you know, this is really a very prominent symptom for this client. And, you know, this rubric really captures the essence of this client. So then go to your repertory and look at that rubric and look at the remedies that are in that rubric, because something may pop out at you, or something that you haven't considered before and didn't show up in your repertorization may grab you and say, oh, wow, you know, that I need to look at that. And sometimes that opens up the whole case, and it's just a match. You just know it's a match. So always check several materia medica. I mean, we work with Fatak and Morrison and Vermeulen and Clark. So you want to check all of those, because they vary a little bit. Some emphasize one characteristic or set of characteristics, and another author will emphasize something else. So you want to look at that total picture. And Clark is often going to have smaller symptoms, more symptoms than some of the other materia medica. Check similar remedies in Morrison. Morrison always at the end of his list of keynotes, or his list of symptoms, he always lists other remedies that you might check. You should do that. It's a very helpful thing that he does. You can check remedies within a family. Sometimes, you know, we've got a whole list of calis, we've got a whole list of carbs, there's families within the plants, there's families within the animals. So, you know, if one doesn't quite match, look at something that might be similar. And then you also have to go back and say, how certain am I that I really have the key set of rubrics here? And sometimes you go back and you change it and say, you know, I'm not so sure that one's so important in this case. And, you know, this is more central to the case. So back to my prints, my mantra here is kind of look far and wide. So look deep in your repertorization, you know, look at resources. Don't just say, oh boy, it's got to be one of these, and you want to make it fit. You know, it's like the prince with the shoe. You know, all the other women who wanted to make their foot fit in that shoe. That's kind of what we do sometimes with remedies. It's like, okay, we're gonna make it fit this case, and it has to be a real fit. So Vitulkas, this is something I picked up from Vitulkas. He says, never should a remedy be given simply because it scores highest on a repertorization. That includes the top 3. Even a remedy scoring much higher than others should be rejected if its description in the materia medica does not fit well with the patient. So you always go back to the materia medica. You don't say, oh, well, the repertorization told me it was Natmure. you can't do that. You have to go back to the materia medica and say, okay, let's look at Nat Muir. What's the fit between this case and Nat Muir? And as he says, as mentioned before, repertorization is merely a clue. It's not the final answer. It is a clue. It helps us. It does the math for us. We can move things around. We can delete rubrics. We can add rubrics, and it makes it very easy. But it's a tool. That's all it is. There's nothing magical. It doesn't give us the answer. Okay, so just as a reminder, small specific remedies may not score high in a repertorization. They may not show up at all unless you've put in very clear, specific characteristic symptoms. So I just gave you some examples here of small rubrics, of small remedies. Okay, so here's a couple of repertorizations. They're small. There's only 5 rubrics in each one, and they produce pretty small remedies. So it's possible if you're very clear about the remedies, too many R's, the rubrics you've put in. So the first one, Cali Brum, comes up, and then we have some polycrests. And in the second one, creosotum, and then what's the next one? We almost predict it's sulfur. So it's just something to keep in mind. But we have hepersulf in this one, which I don't think we've seen in any other repertorization. Ozone is here, chamomilla. So, you know, you have to, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to think about the rubrics that you pick, and that's based on the symptoms. So, finding the perfect fit. What did the prince have to do to find Cinderella? He had to look far and wide. So just as a review for the things that we've gone over, select characteristic rubrics carefully. That's the magic in a repertorization. The symptoms that you pick out, and then the match of the rubrics to the symptom is going to be key. And then don't use giant rubrics. Probably anything over 200 remedies is questionable. Be sure that small rubrics are really strange, rare, and peculiar. And it's not just somebody dreamed up a new way of writing a much larger symptom. 10 rubrics maximum in a repertorization. Don't duplicate similar rubrics. Be aware of the relative opportunity for large remedies to earn a high score. It doesn't mean it's not the right remedy. It's just that the probability of it coming up in your repertorization is higher. Look deep into the repertorization. Check remedies with similar weights and the same total number of rubrics. Don't assume that the highest scoring 3 are the best. Look into specific characteristic rubrics for possible remedy matches to the case. Examine similar remedies. If the match is not great, look for possibilities elsewhere. Look for families. Look at related remedies. Always look for the best match between the case and the remedy. Consult several materia medica. Study materia medica, particularly those smaller remedies, so that they're, that they're implanted in your brain, so that, that you consider them when certain symptoms come up. Because chances are they may not show up in your repertorization. So go look far and wide. All right, so that's basically what I have to say today about repertorization. So if you have questions, it would be helpful if you, I guess, put them on the chat. Is that what we should do, Bill?
I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody, so
Okay.
that might be easier than typing in messages.
Okay.
But I'm getting feedback from someone. One of the participants, if you know what's going on. There, it's gone now.
Okay, who has a question?
Hi, Dorothy. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's Mary. I just have a question about, at the very beginning, I don't have a software, so I'm kind of just asking a question about, not yet, I'm going to get it, but when you talked about the intensity of the rubric, are you, at the very beginning of the talk, in your radar program, you can adjust the intensity of the rubric.
Right.
Is that per client? Like you say, mind, poverty, this client has an intensely,
Yes.
is that like a judgment call for each patient
Yes.
that
Yes.
you're making?
Yes.
Okay.
That would
It's not
vary.
like you believe that that should.
No, it would depend. And often that comes up, when they talk about case taking and they say underline, if the person goes back to that and repeats it, that's one way of looking at intensity.
I see.
If the person goes back to that over and over and over again, and they say underline when you're taking your case, if they go back to that symptom.
I see. Okay, good.
That's one way of judging intensity. Now, as I said, a lot of people don't even pay any attention to it, but Tulkas tells us that intensity is important. And in some cases, you'll see that. You'll see a client who just, it's almost like they obsess about something.
Okay. So it looks like MacRep might not offer that, or do you know?
Oh yeah, I think they do. I think they all do similar things. As I say, I'm not really I am not a MacRep person, but I think they all do the same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure you can change intensity in MacRep.
Yeah.
I have a question. How are you doing, Dorothy?
Good, thank you.
You mentioned about the Kunzli dots, but
Yes.
in your last summarization, you do not have that included, right?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
You remember the star bullets, what you were talking about, Kunzli dot?
Right.
You don't have that listed in this list, what you are showing right now on the screen. Does it?
Okay, well, maybe I left it out. But yeah, that one of the Kunzli dots or something that you should look at. And also, if there's a 4, if a particular remedy has a 4, I'd check it out.
Okay, and that 4 is also not here?
The Kunzli dots are in your repertory. That's where you find them. And they're
not on the radar.
Yeah, they're in the repertory on radar, but they wouldn't show up in a repertorization. But they're in when you go to that rubric and you see all the remedies listed. There'll be a Kunzli dot by some of them. They're few and far between, but you will see them if you look for them in your book, or if you have the software program. When you click on the repertory page, the Kunzli dots will show up.
Okay, got you. Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, Dorothy, this is John Jamison.
Hi, John.
I put a website on the chat window.
Okay.
I was learning and playing months ago, found a site called abchomeopathy.com. And they have a remedy app. It's hard to sometimes relate their remedy finder to the essential synthesis descriptions and rubrics. But have you had any experience with that, or is that something that's worth playing with just to see how software works?
I think all of these are worth playing with, and I believe that Radar and Mac Repertory will let you use their software for a certain amount of time to find out how it works. And I think at one point, I don't know what I did with it, but at one point I had kind of a list of software programs, and there's Radar or Synthesis actually has a very small program that you can put on your telephone for $99, which it's not such a beautiful repertorization chart, but it does the job. And it's got all of Synthesis, and it does an analysis for you. It doesn't have, you can't look up remedies on it, but it's a nice little program for 99 bucks. And then you can send your chart to your email. So that's something you want to look at. And I believe there's a number of free ones. I mean, one day I was fooling around and I just said, you know, homeopathy repertorization charts and did a search. And there are a number of free ones. Mm-hmm. So definitely, you know, play around with it. Okay, other questions?
Hi, Dorothy. This is Jenny Rosengren.
Hi, Jenny.
I just wanted to thank you for this because it really helped me to, like, my gut instinct was to not pick the top 3 sometimes, and I really appreciated you showing the numbers there of just how often those polycrests show up, and to look at those smaller remedies. So it's kind of given me that, oh good, you were doing the right thing, because I wasn't sure. So I just thank you for this today.
Well, you're welcome. And it you know, it's, we tend to think of it as, oh, you know, this is like cast in stone or something. And you know, Vitulcas is right. It's just a tool, and tools have their limits. And we have to be careful about, you know, saying, oh yeah, I did this and this is the remedy, and, you know, by gosh, it better fit. Because we have to hunt, and the fit is there, but you know, we do have to hunt for it, and it's not, it doesn't just reveal itself when we put a few rubrics into a repertorization chart. You got to think, and that, you know, that's I mean, there's a little bit of science in this, but there's also a lot of art in this whole process. And, you know, a lot of the art is finding those significant symptoms and then finding the appropriate rubric to fit that symptom.
I have a question.
Sure.
In the repertory, there are sometimes symptoms that are accompanied by other symptoms, and those are very helpful. But what if you have a client with symptoms that are accompanied by other symptoms, but the repertory does not show them together? Do you just go ahead and use each symptom separately, or how do you weight that?
Well, I would definitely look for concomitants. You know, go to the section accompanied by, you know, and check those out thoroughly.
Yes, for sure.
And then I think the next best thing would be to list the 2 symptoms independently.
Okay. But you wouldn't combine those types. You were talking about just similar.
No, because something happening concomitantly means that they're happening at the same time, but they're both real symptoms.
Symptoms, right.
Yeah, so I wouldn't, you know, they might have very different rubrics associated with them. So no, that's not something that you'd want to combine. Okay,
I just wanted to make sure on that. Thank you.
I have a question kind of along those lines, looking at the rep, and say you have a patient that dreams of something and you cannot find it in the dreams and it's very strong. Can you use delusion? Do you ever do that? Like, for example, somebody dreams of being rejected by their old boyfriend or something over and over. They dream that. And then you can go to delusion forsaken or something.
You can do that. I would go for, I would thoroughly look at dreams first.
Yeah.
But yes, you can do that, second best choice, but
Great.
yeah. Maria, you have a question? Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Sorry, yeah. I'll have many once I upload the software. Right now I have none. So I'm just using the repertory and really struggling with it because there are certain things which are not clear. The same kind of symptoms you find under different headings. So putting them together also becomes quite difficult.
I'm sorry, you're kind of breaking up. So you can combine symptoms from different sections as long as they're the same. They express the same symptom. I mean, you can combine rubrics from different sections as long as they express the same symptom.
All right, thank you.
I had a question. What if you have a symptom that is exactly what the client is describing, and you find the rubric and it's just one remedy for it?
Well, again, you have to say, is this a strange, rare, and peculiar remedy, rubric, symptom? If it is, there are strange, rare, and peculiar rubrics in the repertory that have only one or two symptoms. So if definitely look at that rubric and that remedy. But, you also might want to back up and say, is there something that's a little more characteristic? And if it's strange, rare, and peculiar, go for it. That might be. I had a case a while ago, and this is kind of odd, but this gal had a real aggravation with lemon, with lemon specifically. And, I took her case and whatever. And so I looked up allergic to lemon or something. I can't remember exactly, but it was something like that. And there was one remedy. And I said, okay, let's try this. This is a little unusual. We don't usually do this, but it's very specific, and let's try it. And her allergy to lemon went away. She can eat lemon now. So, you just have to play around with things. You have to look at them from lots of different angles and make the best judgment you can. Now, if I'd repertorized her case, I'm not sure I ever would have come up with that remedy. I may have, but
yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at, is if I repertorize it. So like I have an example here, it's loss of vision and it's causeless. And so I can't really get any, if I repertorize it, I'm going to have to really kind of go outside of what the client is expressed, right? And what she's kind of seen from her own doctors, from like physicians. So I have one remedy here. If I repertorize it, I think I'm definitely gonna try it, but I don't think it's gonna get me this one specific remedy. Yeah. I think that's what I am getting at, is that.
Yeah. Well, go do both things. Both things. Loss of vision causeless is kind of odd.
Yeah.
Usually there's some reason somewhere.
Yeah, well, they've gone to neurologists, two
Okay.
neurologists, and so,
Okay.
and both of them have told them we have no idea why this.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I would definitely look at other pieces of the case.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? So now Barbara's going to get these beautiful repertorizations, right?
Yeah.
No more big remedies, no more than 10. Very characteristic symptoms. Okay, any other questions? And if not,
One
then,
question.
oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Piyush. When you said not to select one, but in a case where some symptoms are peculiar, we may even consider one after we check materia medica and keynotes and so on, and if everything matches. But if it is more than one, what is a good number? What is a rubric what is a good number of remedy for a rubric that we should be considering if we are not considering which is very, very large, or we are not considering which is very, very small?
Well, there are people, this kind of varies. I think if you go over 200, you're out of the ballpark. So
Okay. What is the lowest number?
20 to 175, somewhere in there. When you start getting, 2, 3, 5, you kind of have to look and see, is this really a strange, rare, and peculiar symptom? And if it is, by all means, stick with it. But
Okay.
people when they do approving don't always go to the rubric that they should go to, and so they invent a new one because
Oh, okay.
so that that's what happens. People do approvings and they don't always link into the more traditional the more traditional rubrics, and so they say, oh well, this is worded a little differently, so I'm going to put this in as a new rubric. And that's what happens. So that's why we get these, or somebody decides it should go in mind, and somebody decides it should go in generals, or somebody decides it should go in sleep. And so we have different rubrics.
That makes so much sense.
So that's another.
So the good way to say will be like, okay, we can go from 10 to 100, and that will be, we are in a good place. But if we go over 150, that's not very, very good.
Yeah, over 175, I'd say. I don't know, Barbara. I don't know if Barbara wants to chime in on this, but I mean, it's not a set deal. But you get up into the 175, 200, 300s, you're out of the park. So you kind of have to look and see what other rubrics you have, and you're not going to destroy a repertorization because you happen to have one rubric that has 200 remedies. It's just that if you put a bunch of those in, you're going to get a polycrest.
Got you. Very good. Thank you very much.
Chances are.
Dorothy, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I have a patient who said a very specific symptom that I remember hearing it in a class. And I've been looking around and I just can't find it. And the symptom is that whenever she's driving over a bridge, she feels she's going to fall and then drown her and whoever is driving with her.
Okay.
And I looked in delusions, in dreams, in fears, and I just can't find it.
Okay. All right. Send it to me in an email, and I will see if I can find the remedy.
Okay.
Okay. You might look in Argentum Nitricum in Prisma, because he gives rubrics, and that's pretty, there's a lot of fear of bridges in Argentum Nitricum. So you might look there, but send it to me in email and I'll do a search for you and see what we can come up with.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Dorothy.
Okay, any other burning questions?
One more question. Can we get a video of this, or will this be uploaded in the website, in the college website, as a webinar?
I don't know. That's a question for Bill or Barbara.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Dorothy. It was great.
You're most welcome. Okay, so if everyone's question is answered, then we'll say goodbye and thank you for coming and listening and thinking about this.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Dorothy.
Barbara.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say Dorothy's pretty much answered the questions, but when it comes to the size of rubrics, which is the biggest, which is the smallest, like Dorothy already said, it kind of depends a little bit what other rubrics you have, and also on the grade of the remedy. Like if you have a remedy in your other 3 rubrics, and then you find a rubric with 250 remedies, and you wonder if you should take that rubric or not, I would probably look at it and see what grade that remedy has in the bigger rubric. And if it's a 4, you know, I kind of put it to the side and remember that it's there. But if I already have the same remedy in smaller rubrics, I wouldn't take the very big one. Because if you take the big one, then all these other remedies come into the picture as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, that goes back to looking at those number 4s. When you look at your repertorization, those 4s pop out, and you want to look at them.
And I don't think you're at any disadvantage using the book, by the way, because what happens with the software is that you get so much data that you can all plug in, and then you kind of water down your repertorization. When you work with a book, you need to think clearly about what rubric do I want to use, so that you don't fill pages and pages with rubrics. Because, I mean, I look them up as well. So, you know, you need to really narrow it down and come to 12 or so rubrics. I mean, if it's 16 or so, or 18, okay. But I mean, I would say that's the absolute max in a case. Because otherwise it all just gets, you know, then, and also to look at related rubrics, like Dorothy said, look at the rubrics related to the symptom. So, and if you combine rubrics, you don't want to combine a general and a physical, and a nose and a knee and the weather sensitivity. You want to combine the rubric that all goes or comes out in one symptom. So if you have a knee, and I get a knee repertorization and get 12 rubrics about the knee, I mean, you really get lost in that. Now with the software, you can put it all together, but I don't think that it's really good, actually, because it just throws in too many remedies that are just so specific to this one sensation. So,
well, that's why it's good to find the most comprehensive rubric to describe that symptom.
Yeah, much better than combining. Yes.
Well, and you don't want to be combining a whole bunch of rubrics.
Yeah, that's all. I'm really happy that you all came, even as far as Singapore. Thank you for attending in the middle of the night.
Oh my gosh.
Almost midnight here.
Well, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
And
that was great.
We'll see you all. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.